Hey, greetings everyone. GleeCon is here again, and I am bringing you another episode of Lore of Warcraft. I think we are kind of getting near the end of the book that we're reading here. Not, the end is not necessarily in sight, but I think we're probably about 3/4 of the way through. Last time we continued to play with Maleficent some. She still is just starting to get to the wetlands because on the way I had to finish off the Stone Rot Dam quest line and make it the rest of the way with her, get some setup stuff. So we should really start having fun with her in that zone on the next episode as we play through Warcraft Classic. In the book that we are just mentioning, the before mentioned book is the War of the Scaleborn. We are in chapter 21. In the last chapter, they had just recently caught Farak, and we've entered a new phase of the war where now Vyranoth is sort of playing it cool, no pun intended, and just building this glacier, and they're trying to figure out how they want to catch her. Meanwhile, Iridikron not anywhere in sight. And the most recent development is that the young Order dragons who betrayed the aspects, who had then been imprisoned, were just freed with a prison break. So stay a while and listen as we continue with chapter 21 of War of the Scaleborn. Malygos had been fighting on the Algeth'ar Academy front for almost 50 years, but today was the first day he feared they might not hold Vyranoth and her primalists at bay. Under normal circumstances, Malygos and Nozdormu fought together, but Siragos's letter had forced the aspects to change tactics. While Malygos led the Bronze's Temporal Guardians and the Blue Spell Scales against Sazans and his battalions, Nozdormu took his Chronomagi into the Academy to defend the two flights from a flanking attack. For now, Malygos would have to hold the line alone. The Spellweaver lowered his head and narrowed his eyes against Vyranoth's storm. The blizzard swept around the perimeter of the battlefield, held back by a handful of arcane wardens. The snow flew with such fury, Malygos could not see the Academy's southern spires. Ice coated each one of the Academy's floating islands. It was so cold, even the great fires in the braziers shivered. Vyranoth often brought her blizzards to bear, but today's storm felt particularly fierce. The Temporal Guardians fought on the front lines, forming a long crescent around the Academy's proving grounds. The battlefront was less a line than it was a vertical bowl or orb that surrounded the northern islands, preventing the Incarnates from launching an attack from below. Malygos and his blues flew at its heart, providing ranged support. The spell scales also controlled nearly 100 arcane elementals that had been glamoured to look like bronzes and blues, which made their forces look far larger than they were. Under normal circumstances, Malygos had little to fear from the Primalists. Sazans' frost scales struggled to take even a talon's length of the Academy grounds, but Nozdormu's absence left the Temporal Guardians in uncharacteristic disarray. Malygos' own spell scales seemed apprehensive, watching the heavy snows with trepidation. Yeah, it's like doing a dungeon with no healers. Damn Siragosa and her ilk, Malygos thought with a shake of his head. They had thrown a well-organized defense into disorder, and when the blue aspect asked if Siragosa had been telling the truth in her letter, Nozdormu infuriatingly replied, "Sometimes." Sometimes? What use was being able to see the future if you couldn't use it with precision? If the letter did not speak true, the aspects had split their forces and weakened their front line for nothing. If they ignored Siragos's warning, they risked being taken unawares. Either way, Vyranoth gained an advantage. It left the Spellweaver ill at ease, for he could not guess how the Incarnate would capitalize on it. To add to Malygos' frustrations, the head teacher of the Algeth'ar Academy, Doragosa, had not been aware of a secret passage into her hallowed halls. She and her resident professor spent the night scouring their grounds for an ingress point, but in the morning they came to the blue aspect with empty talons. Like many places in the Broodlands, the Chittering Caverns were riddled with caves and tunnels. There was not time to search them all, and no one seemed to know the location of a Drake's Grotto. If such a place existed, it was likely a nickname. To be safe, Malygos had hidden a regiment of arcane wardens and constructs in the Chittering Caverns. Nozdormu had taken a position within the Academy, ready to respond with his Chronomagi if Siragos's claims were true. The clouds darkened overhead, turning the light dusky. Malygos sensed a shift in the wind, but before he could react, an enormous bolt of lightning stabbed out of the sky, striking one of the arcane wardens on the Academy's ramparts. The magic that held Vyranoth's blizzard at the perimeter of the proving grounds weakened, then shattered as the other wardens lost control of the spell. The storm swept in with snows so cold the flakes bit into Malagos's hide like tiny fangs. Ice encrusted his wings. The bronzes on the front lines panicked. Though the Spellweaver could not see them in these whiteout conditions, the wind carried their snarls, snaps, and pained screams to his ears. He narrowed his eyes against the weather as 3 bronze dragons fell back pursued by a magma talon who burned so hot he melted the very storm around him. "Hold the line!" Malagos shouted, stretching forth his talons and releasing a barrage of arcane missiles at the Primalist. The missiles struck the primal dragon in the chest and wing. With a screech, the magma talon fell. "Vadragosa!" he called to his flight leader over the howling winds. "Shield me!" Malagos could barely hear her cry of affirmation, and he certainly could not see her in this storm. Luckily, that meant their enemies couldn't see him either. A violet-blue bubble enveloped the Spellweaver. Flying to the center of the battlefield, he halted in the air and began to channel a supernova. Though he remained alert, he drew upon the arcane energy in the core of his being, the energy in the very world around him. Even the cries on the battlefield turned to whispers, and the howl of wind and snow seemed to fade. His wings crackled with violet-blue sparks as he beat them faster and faster until the magic swirled through his veins and rattled against the inside of his skull, desperate to get free. When he could no longer contain the arcane force, Malagos swept his wings wide and released it into the sky. It exploded out in all directions with a terrible boom, pushing Vyranoth's blizzard back and incinerating most of the Primalist's front line on contact, leaving only a hazy vapor in their wake. Sunlight fell onto the Academy's proving grounds, the first touch of warmth Malagos had felt all day. A gentle wind filled his wings, giving him a moment of respite after such a draining spell. He took a deep breath to collect himself. His mana tapped. He needs to eat a biscuit. The Temporal Guardians trumpeted from the front lines, frantic. Malagos lifted his head. The skies between the Academy and the Veiled Ossuary were filled with Primalists, surrounding the blues and bronzes on all sides. Shock drove a painful spike into his chest. By Malagos's rough estimation, there were likely close to 1,000 primal dragons in the sky. Vyranoth's Frost Scales and Magma Talons had been joined by at least 2 battalions of Iridikron's Rock Furies, though the Stone Scale did not appear on the battlefield himself. So this was what the Incarnate had planned. Vyranoth was a clever commander, but she rarely outplayed the aspects so thoroughly. Exhausted and out of resources, Malagos could not hope to meet such a force on the field, not without Nosdormu's help. He dared not send for the bronze aspect, not if the Incarnate meant to flank them too. Though Malagos could not see her, the Frozen Heart's bugle echoed across the battlefield. The ice on the Academy's island shattered, then rose into the air to form massive elementals. The Primalists advanced, darkening the skies with their wings. On the front line, the flight leader of the Temporal Guardians roared, instructing the Bronzes to kick up a storm of sands to slow the Primalists' advance. Great glittering clouds swirled around the Primalists, reducing their speed by half. Meanwhile, Vadragosa and the other spell scales rained arcane missiles down upon the ice elementals, culling their numbers. Still, there were too many enemies on the field to fathom. The Bronze's magic would not last long, a few heartbeats, no more, and Malagos could not send the Blues and Bronzes to the slaughter. They would not fight another Battle of Emberfall this day. "Fall back," Malagos roared. "Spell scales! Raise a shield over the Academy to cover our retreat!" The flight leaders trumpeted the order. As the Bronzes began to retreat, Vyranoth appeared on the field, swooping to the fore of the vanguard and scattering the Bronze's temporal sands with a burst of wind. At her call, the shattered ice elementals on the platforms reformed and rose anew. Aspect and Incarnate locked gazes over the battlefield. Malagos curled his lip, bearing fangs. Was Vyranoth so sure of her victory that she would risk appearing on the front lines? Why, Malagos could almost blink to her position and drag her through a portal to the Vault of the Incarnates, just as he had done with Varrock. He could end this chapter of the war in one move, if only he'd had the mana to do so. It's a trap, he told himself. Vyranoth could not win at Algeth'ar, so she sought to lure the Spellweaver into a very inane mistake. Did she really think him so foolish or desperate enough to risk his own safety? Still, Malagos could not just turn tail and run, not with the Frozen Heart within range. Even in his depleted state, the Spellweaver was not without options. He has a wand. Gritting his teeth, he called upon the last reserves of his strength to manifest 2 glimmering images of himself. They slid off his scales with a hiss. He sent them charging toward the Incarnate on a roar. Arcane missiles burst from the image's talons, raining down on Vyranoth and her wing leaders. Vyranoth rolled, dodging the first salvo. Her wing leaders scattered. The second burst of arcane missiles slammed into her left flank as she ducked and wove through her ranks. The Primalists rallied around their incarnate, but Malygos' images whooshed past them, incorporeal as wind. Vyranoth fled from them. He stretched forth his forefoot, giving chase. Beyond the glittering tips of his talons, he watched a horde of rock furies rush toward him, but he was close. So close to striking Vyranoth down. If he could just damage a wing, send her plummeting to the rocks below. "Fall back, Malygos!" someone shrieked. Just a few more moments. A great weight slammed into the Spellweaver from behind and dragged him back. The Temporal Guardian surged forth, blasting the rock furies with superheated sand. His focus shattered. Malygos lost control of his images, and he watched them dissipate from the field. "Do you wish this day to be your last?" Nosdormu snapped, dragging the Spellweaver to the safety of the Academy's enormous glittering shield. "This is not the time for heroics. You will not be able to repeat Flame's fall with Vyranoth." "Do you think I don't know that?" Malygos exclaimed, shaking himself loose from the bronze aspect's grip. "I nearly had her. A broken wing would have sufficed." "The rock furies would have fallen upon you first," Nosdormu said with a huff. Perhaps the Timeless One was right, but Malygos was not about to say as much. With an annoyed rumble, the Spellweaver turned back to face the field. Any spell scale not actively powering the shield launched arcane missiles at the advancing armies, while Draconid repositioned the ballistae to meet the oncoming force. Primal dragons tumbled from the sky, dead before they hit the ground. The Primalist wing leaders called for a halt over the outlying islands, unwilling to risk a siege, at least not today. "Did they attack from the caverns?" Malygos asked. "Did Siragosa's letter speak true?" "Aye," Nosdormu said. "We defeated their vanguard handily, but most of the ordered defectors escaped. I suspect your Siragosa was among their number." "Very well," Malygos sighed, watching Vyranoth lay claim to the Academy's outlying islands. In the distance, the blue aspect could just barely see the sunlight glinting off the Incarnate's icy scales. He could not say for certain, but he thought he saw a cruel smile on the Frozen Heart's lips. At least she would not take Algeth'ar Academy that day. As night fell, Neltharion joined the other aspects in Veldraken. The stars wheeled high above the seat, indifferent, uncaring, cold. In the distance, the protective barriers around the city shimmered. Beyond them, Neltharion could just make out a little violet bubble around what would have been Algeth'ar Academy. The day wasn't the disaster it might have been. The Academy hadn't fallen, but the Primalists had captured its floating islands. Malygos managed to hold the Academy against the Primalist assault, while Nosdormu repelled a flanking maneuver from inside the Academy itself. From what Neltharion could gather, Vyranoth intended to pressure the aspects into a retreat, then decimate their armies with a surprise attack. To support the assault, Iridikron had sent a full battalion of his rock furies to the Veiled Ossuary. Their appearance on the battlefield meant two things. One, Vyranoth was growing frustrated with her failure to make headway in Thaldraszus, and two, Malygos and Nosdormu's campaign had been successful enough that the Primalist campaign required reinforcements from Harrow's Deep. Iridikron had hoarded his rock furies for centuries. The fact that they had taken the field was a concession of sorts, an acknowledgement that even with their superior numbers, the Primalists weren't winning the war. As Neltharion strode into the council chamber, he found the other aspects gathered around the campaign map. Two new rock fury pawns stood at the Veiled Ossuary, while a tiny arcane shield now glittered over the Academy. The aspects nodded their greetings to him, but did not stop their conversation. "I would not consider it a loss," Alexstrasza said to Malygos and Nosdormu. "You managed to halt the Primalist advance while minimizing loss of life." "Barely," Malygos replied, tapping his talons on the floor. "We must celebrate every good thing, no matter how small," the Dragon Queen said with a tender smile. "The Primalists will not fly on Veldraken this night. And is it true that one of our wayward drakes warned you of the surprise attack?" "One did, yes," Malygos replied. "Siragosa." "I remember her well," Alexstrasza replied. "If her heart can be softened, the hearts of the others may change as well. All is not lost." Neltharion cleared his throat. "Our enemies would agree with you, Alexstrasza," he said, gesturing to the new pawns on the campaign table. "I would not have thought to see the Rock Furies leave Harrow's Deep, but it appears the Incarnates want for numbers." "I don't know how we're going to counter them," Nosdormu said, glancing sideways at Malygos. "The Blues cannot maintain the shield indefinitely, and our forces are stretched thin." I cannot pull any more arcane wardens from Vakthos or the archives, Malygos said, not without compromising the southern border. Alexstrasza frowned. I'm certain that's what the Incarnates want. Ysera, would you be able to dedicate any of your verdant preservers to Thaldraszus? Not 2 battalions worth, I'm afraid, the green aspect said. If we do not defend the plains at our full strength, the Primalists will decimate our herds. The Broodlands would starve. And we cannot send any of our forces from the Reach, Neltharion said to Alexstrasza. We barely control the region as it stands. I know, the Dragon Queen said, dropping her gaze to the campaign map. Our flights have fought bravely, but I fear our campaigns now stand on a talon's point. We must capture Vyranoth, else I fear the scales may tip in the Primalists' favor. Neltharion and Alexstrasza had been having this conversation often of late. The black and red dragonflights were battered, exhausted, and losing hope. The Frozen Hearts Glacier continued to expand at a rapid rate. At its current speed of growth, Neltharion thought the glacier would overtake the Reach in 15 to 20 years. Removing Vyranoth from the field would stop the glacier and scatter the Primalists to the wind. Although Iridikron would marshal his forces in time, it would give the Broodlands a much-needed reprieve from Vyranoth's unending assault and relentless winter. I agree, Neltharion said. The only question is how. What have we not tried? Nozdormu sighed. The Frozen Heart learned from Firak's folly. She never takes to the field herself, preferring to lead from far behind the front lines. We've tried reaching her with arcane portals, time dilation, illusory armies. Malygos counted the strategies on his talons. Sandstorms, stand monsters, poison, heat waves, stealth attacks, assassination attempts. To be frank, my queen, we're running out of ideas. Not for the first time this century, Neltharion's thoughts turned back to the Drakthir. How would the War have gone had they been able to take the battlefield beside the 5 flights? Would the aspects still be standing here more than 100 years after the Battle of Stormsunder Crater, debating how to knock Vyranoth from the sky? Would Iridikron himself already be a memory? A whisper curled into Neltharion's mind. You are too weak to defeat her alone. With our power, you could capture the Frozen Heart. We can end this war for you. Even the Stone-Scaled would bow to our strength. We need to draw Vyranoth out, Neltharion said, talking over the voices in his head. There must be something we haven't tried. She has family in the Frozen Fangs. Perhaps we take the Whelplings hostage. Ysera shook her head. Given our history, I do not believe it's wise to take any more whelps from the primal dragons. On this matter I agree, Alexstrasza said. Then what do you suggest? Neltharion asked them. Everything we have tried has failed, and Vyranoth will not fall for a ruse. The Dragon Queen sat and hugged her wings against her back. She pressed her lips together, considering the campaign map that stretched between them. Very few dragons ever saw Alexstrasza like this, vulnerable and raw, maybe, but never unsure of herself. Though she had grown into her role as queen in recent centuries, Neltharion still saw glimpses of the tender-hearted creature behind her crown of golden horns. It's almost like alliteratively, kind of like a Jesus thing. There is only one thing Vyranoth wants, Alexstrasza said. Me. I will face Vyranoth in talon-to-talon combat. If I lose, my life is forfeit. If she loses, she will submit herself to the vault of the Incarnates. Gasps tore through the chamber. Neltharion reared back, shocked the Dragon Queen could even suggest such a thing. Absolutely not, were the first words to leap from the Earthwarder's mouth. The idea was preposterous. There was no denying that Alexstrasza was a capable warrior, but even she would be hard-pressed to defeat Vyranoth in single combat, even if the Frozen Heart decided to fight honorably, and Neltharion did not trust the Incarnates to abide by the rules of engagement. The flights could not risk Alexstrasza's life. No, sister, Ysera said in a whisper, reaching out and placing a forefoot on one of Alexstrasza's own. Ysera squeezed. It is far too dangerous, and I cannot bear the thought of losing you. I mislike this, Nozdormu said. Remember what I told you the day the barriers fell. To risk your life is to risk the very survival of the flights. Vyranoth will never agree to this, Malygos said, shaking his head. She will expect treachery. I believe she will agree, Alexstrasza replied. She joined the Incarnates to hold me to account for my actions and the actions of the Dragonflights. As Dragon Queen, the responsibility for the 5 flights begins and ends with me. I must stand to answer for everything that has happened, not only to satisfy Vyranoth's quest for justice, but to prove the goodness of our cause. Vyranoth must be stopped, she continued. I cannot stand behind my defenders any longer, not in good conscience. It's not the worst plan. Neltharion blew out a breath. He stared at the campaign map, trying to think of anything that might spare Alexstrasza from this choice. Outside of armor, there was little the Earth Warder could do to protect the Dragon Queen in single combat, and as ambitious as he might be, he had no desire to see Alexstrasza fall. The death of any aspect would utterly shatter a flight. Without Tyr, none of them could be replaced. If Alexstrasza lost, the war was over. The chamber fell silent for a moment, each aspect turning to their own thoughts. Alexstrasza speaks wisdom, but we are strongest when we fight together, Ysera said, after a long moment, casting her gaze around the chamber. Thus, I will agree to this plan on one condition, that Alexstrasza fights with a boon from each of our flights. She should not have to face the Frozen Heart alone. Now, that was an idea Neltharion could support. What do you suggest? Alexstrasza asked. Elementium armor from the forges of the Obsidian Citadel, Neltharion said, already imagining the design. Black, gold, and set with gems representing each flight. I will craft it myself and have the scalesmiths imbue it with the warmth from our forges. I will enchant it to resist Vyranoth's frost, Malygos said, looking to the Dragon Queen. The blue dragonflight will also shield your wings from frost. It's been remarkably effective on the front. Yes, precisely, Ysera said, a touch of excitement in her voice. I should like to imbue her talents with poison, but I doubt that would have much effect on Vyranoth's icy heart. What she needs is a warm island song. Instead, I will take my golden vines and saturate them with healing magics, which will act as a restorative. It will be as a gentle breath from the dream, a constant, sweet support. Good, the Dragon Queen said, looking to Nosdormu. What of you, Nosdormu? How might I carry the spirit of your flight into battle with me? Prognostication, Nosdormu said. Malygos wrinkled his snout and mouthed, "What?" at Nosdormu, but the bronze aspect ignored him and continued on. The magic is experimental at best, but my flight can imbue the Dragon Queen with the sands of time from the temporal conflux. In theory, the magic should allow her to predict the Frozen Heart's attacks and give her more time to react. Alexstrasza is not a bronze dragon, Malygos cocked his head. Will she even be able to manifest or control such magic? She will need my support, Nosdormu said with a shake of his head. She might otherwise slip into the time waves, and we could lose her. Ysera and Alexstrasza exchanged a wary glance. I'd rather you just lose Vyranoth, Malygos said with a snort. If it were possible, I would see to it, Nosdormu said. Are we agreed then? The Dragon Queen asked, looking to each aspect in turn. The other aspects chorused their assent, the fires blazing on their banners. Even if I think it madness, Neltharion said. Aye. Very well, the Dragon Queen said. I shall send envoys to the Veiled Ossuary. Let us put an end to the Frozen Heart's reign of terror. Several days after the failed gambit at Algeth'ar Academy, Vyranoth's wing leaders brought her a dragon figurine of never-melting ice. The Frozen Heart recognized it immediately. Alexstrasza had gifted it to her centuries ago, and she had smashed it and sent back the shards after Farak had been captured. Now the Dragon Queen had repaired it with gold. Vyranoth grumbled at the sight of it, thinking that Alexstrasza would invite her to yet another parley, but this time the Dragon Queen issued her a challenge. Single combat at a time and location of Vyranoth's choosing. So it had finally come to this. Alexstrasza was desperate enough to face Vyranoth on her own. It was an admittance of sorts, an acknowledgement that the mighty aspects would soon be unable to continue their campaign against the Primalists. They were losing ground in Thaldrazis in the region, not quickly, of course, but Vyranoth was nothing if not patient. Even if she failed to capture the Reach, her glacier would consume it in time. While Alexstrasza was a formidable opponent, not even she could hope to face Vyranoth on a battlefield of ice. But the aspects would not risk Alexstrasza's life if they were not certain she would win. Still, perhaps an engagement with the Dragon Queen would be worth the risk. Vyranoth flew the news to Harrow's Deep herself, knowing the information would be of interest to Iridikron. The Stone-Scaled loved to turn the Aspect Stone stratagems against them. Perhaps he would see the value in accepting such a challenge. Iridikron received Vyranoth in his war cavern, which lay deep at the heart of Harrow's Deep. Here the roots of the mountain never stopped rumbling. Magma churned endlessly, lighting the cavern walls. Great lava falls veiled Iridikron's seat of power, which lay at the cavern's far end. Stalactites and dripstones were lit with an eerie bioluminescent green light. No wind blew this deep, so the air felt stagnant, heavy. After checking with Iridikron's wing leaders, Vyranoth landed on the center platform alone. Iridikron did not keep her waiting long, which was just as well. The oppressive heat in Harrow's Deep threatened to melt the scales off her hide.
Vyranoth, my old friend,
Iridikron said as he landed beside her. He stalked past her, heading for his campaign map.
What brings you to Harrow's Deep this day?
News from the front, she said, joining him on the massive stone slab.
Algeth'ar has challenged me to single combat.
Iridikron did not react to the news right away. He turned his head a few degrees, considering Vyranoth.
It's a trap,
he said without any affectation.
The aspects grow desperate, Vyranoth said. I believe we should capitalize on their recklessness.
After a long moment, the stone scale flicked his gaze down to her feet, then back up to her eyes.
Go on. I will take Algeth'ar north, forcing Neltharion to fight at the Reach alone,
Vyranoth said, looking down at the stone map before them. She pushed the Dragon Queen's paw into the icebound eye, a massive natural sinkhole in the frozen fangs.
With your rock furies, I can send Razvik to apply deadly pressure to Malygos and Nozdormu and Thaldrazes, forcing them to fall back to Tyrhold or Valdrakken. This will prompt Neltharion to split his forces and leave the Reach in Lavarion's talons. Valdrakken is the greater prize. If it falls, the Broodlands fall. We attack Lavarion from the east and west and free Raszageth. And Ysera?
The stone scaled asked, lifting a brow.
She will come east too if Valdrakken burns.
A rumble sounded in the stone scaled's chest. He considered the map, going still as he mulled Vyranoth's strategy over in his mind. Only the brighter of the energies on his spine moved.
You know the Dragon Queen better than I,
Iridikron said.
How certain are you that you could best her in one-on-one combat?
Vyranoth snorted.
I would have killed her at Wyrmrest Temple had Neltharion not intervened. That isn't the story I heard,
Iridikron replied.
I confess, Vyranoth, I do not like this strategy. It would be better for us to continue our war of attrition. The Reach will fall in another 10 or 20 years, and once we are reunited with Raszageth, Valdrakken will not be far behind.
Have I not earned this? Vyranoth said through gritted teeth.
I have asked you for so little, and now I come to you asking, no, demanding, that I be given the chance to tear my satisfaction from the Dragon Queen's hide. You ask me to put everything we have worked for in jeopardy,
Iridikron replied, gesturing to the paws at Valdrakken.
This fight has always been a personal one for you, but I fear that your hatred for the Dragon Queen may be clouding your judgment.
No, Vyranoth said, her tone turning to ice.
I see a bold strategy that would allow us to smash through our enemy's defenses, take the aspects off guard, and bring the Broodlands to its knees. Will you wait for them to come to Harrow's Deep for your head, Iridikron? Or will you join me in this offensive and save our kind from their tyranny?
Iridikron's expression did not change. For a moment, Vyranoth thought he might reject her plan. She knew how loath he was to leave Harrow's Deep undefended.
Accept the Dragon Queen's challenge, then, Iridikron said. Let us end this.
Oh, and that's it. I wasn't sure if we were going to go ahead and see how that went. And how this is going to play out, but I did feel like it might be too important, and so they would move it to another chapter for us. And you have a feeling once she falls, the rest won't be that far after, because we know how this is going to end, ladies and gents. All right, so we have another episode in the pipe, 5x5, and we have another day where my appreciation for you overfloweth. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching, for listening, and for tuning in. You all rock so much. Always just such a positive effect on my life, whether it's the comments, the people that chat with me, or the joy of making the show itself. We're not going anywhere anytime soon, guys. And I will see you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.